this one, and this. Okay, so now you should see full screen PowerPoint.
We
No,
see your screen. If you click on that slide button, then we'll just see perfect.
Okay, here we go. So here's my name, here's my email if you have any questions after the meeting, and my little website with all kinds of stuff. So many years ago, I traveled in Africa, and I was in Ngorongoro Crater, which some of you might be familiar with. It's a place with uniquely high concentration of big mammals and also big cars, like Jeeps and Land Rovers. And there is a lot of traffic issues. And on my last night there, one of local guides, we were sitting at a campfire at the crater rim, and one of the local guides told me that African buffalo living in the crater have learned to understand the meaning of turn signals in cars. So if a car turns on a turn signal at an intersection, the buffalo would move away from the direction where the car is about to go. And at that time, I thought it was just a fairy tale, because it was impossible. Now I'm kind of more open-minded about such things after many years of studying animal behavior. I still don't know if this story is true or not. I never had a chance to go back to Ngorongoro, and I never had a chance to check this. But this kind of got me interested in how animals adapt to traffic and cars and other vehicles, man-made roads, this kind of stuff. But I never got a chance to do any actual research about this until one lucky opportunity, which I will talk about now. So here in our area, we have 3 species of raptors that can be called urban raptors. And of course, you all know them, the Sharpie, the Cooper's hawk, and the red-tailed hawk. Note that 2 of the 3 are what used to be accipiters. Now the genus has been split. I was actually very lucky to kind of squeeze in my paper before it happened, before it became universally accepted, so I didn't have to go through all those different genera. But this is actually a quite typical situation. In many cities in the world, accipiters form a majority of city raptors. The only species that occurs equally frequently in big cities is black kite in the old world. So there must be something special about them that allows them to adapt to city environment. Also, from these 2 photos, it's kind of looks like one of them is mimicking the other, and people generally think that the smaller species mimics the bigger one, but I suspect it might be the other way around. But I'll talk about this later a little bit. So yes, pretty much every big city in the world has urban raptors. But if you think about it, a city is a nightmarish place to build. There are all kinds of obstacles. There are death traps like big windows and dead ends, and there are moving cars everywhere, and not that much place to hide, and terrible pollution and poisoned rats and whatnot. And in many countries, people are trying to kill everything that moves. So how do raptors survive in those terrible situations? And my theory is that they survive by being much smarter than people usually give them credit for. Everybody knows that crows and ravens are smart, but there's not been so much research on complex behavior in birds of prey. If you talk to anybody who keeps birds of prey, like falconers, it's kind of common knowledge that these birds are much smarter than most people think, but falconers don't do much scientific research or publication, so it kind of stays as an in-group information. And I was lucky to discover just how smart they can be because I happened to be living in West Orange, and every morning I would drive my daughter to school. And every morning I would drive through one and the same intersection. Here is Google Maps photo. This is summer, but actually this whole thing started in November. And every morning I would drive there, and I would be driving down this side street and then make a left turn on what I call Main Street here. And on the intersection, there is a street light. The position of the street lights is shown by these two little asterisks. And every time there is a red light, there will be a line of cars forming on this little side street. And as I was waiting on this side street, I noticed that there was a Cooper's hawk that was catching birds there. So what was going on? It would show up in this little tree here in the bottom right corner, wait until the line of cars reached to this place, and then it would fly very low along the sidewalk so that the cars would be blocking it from you from the other side of the street. And once the bird got to this tree here, it would make a sharp turn, fly between two cars, and snatch a bird from this area in the top. So it turns out the family that lived in this house frequently had dinners outdoors, even in winter. And when they did this, they left breadcrumbs and other tiny food leftovers. So every morning there would be a small flock of birds feeding here. There would be mourning doves and starlings and sparrows, sometimes something else, but usually just these three species. And the hawk knew about this, and it would stalk the birds using this flight approach pattern. It was an immature hawk. And of course, it's when you study predatory behavior in animals, it's very unusual to have an opportunity to observe repeated predation events in the wild. Usually it's very, very difficult. So I decided to park my car there and figure out what was going on. And the first thing I discovered was that the hawk never showed up on weekends. Because on weekends there was not that many cars. But what was really strange was that the bird seemed to know in advance when the line of cars will be long enough to reach to this little tree here. It didn't happen very often. But every time the bird would show up, it meant that the line of cars is going to be longer than usual. So it took me a while to figure what was going on. So this street light here, it had a pedestrian crossing option. If somebody pressed a button, the red light was longer than usual. And only in these situations and only during morning rush hour, the line of cars would be long enough to get to the street. If the pedestrian crossing was not activated, the line of cars would stop around here or here somewhere, but it wouldn't be that long. And then I noticed that the street light had a sound signal for deaf people. So if somebody activated the pedestrian crossing, the moment the pedestrian crossing light went on, there was the sound signal, a little ticking sound. And apparently that's what the bird was reacting to. So when the sound came on, the hawk knew that the line of cars would be longer than usual. And it flew to the street, waited for the cars, and then it used them to attack the birds feeding here. And I observed it a few times, and I calculated that the sound signal was on only less than 4% of the time. So the probability that the bird would just by chance happen to be in this tree after the sound was activated was extremely small. So this whole result was statistically significant. And then I published the paper. The next winter, there was an adult Cooper's hawk that was using the same tactics. But I didn't have time for full-scale observations because I had a second child and it became difficult. And I'm not 100% sure it was the same bird, but I think it was, because it would be quite unlikely to have two birds doing the same thing in consecutive years. And the year after that, they changed the pattern at the street light, and they removed for some reason, or maybe it broke down, I don't know. So there was no more sound signal. And I never saw the hawk again. So that's kind of the end of the story. And I thought it was totally exceptional. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes, really. But when I decided to write it up as a paper, I started looking into literature, and I found a lot of other interesting stuff. First of all, I realized that Cooper's hawk is mostly wintering species in our cities. So these are eBird maps for Cooper's hawk for 2 years of June-July records and 2 years of January-February records. And as you can see, for 2 years in June-July, there is only one tiny record here in Montclair. And for winter months, there is a whole bunch. So unlike in some other parts of the country, they don't seem to be nesting in cities in our area. They only winter here. And that meant that the immature birds that I was observing, I started my observations in November. So it was probably just a few weeks after the bird moved into the city. And that quickly it established the relationship between the sound signal and the length of the car line, which was quite amazing. When I talked about it with different people studying animal behavior, some person said, so what, it's just Pavlov's reflex. It learned to associate the sound signal with the cars and availability of food, not a big deal. But if you think about it, it's not that simple. First of all, the bird has to have a perfect mental map of the whole area. It has to know in advance which trees it would be using for cover and how it will approach the birds and what to do. And it has to plan the whole attack in advance, the whole 3-step movement. So it has to be quite smart, obviously, to do this, considering that it's an immature bird that it just probably moved to the city for the first time in its life. It's very quick adaptation. Oh, there's been some research on other species that live in cities, and people found that red foxes that live in London don't seem to be smarter than foxes that live in the countryside, but they are more likely to explore and more likely to develop new behaviors. And they're bolder. However, there was also research on chimangos, a species of caracara that lives in South America. And they found that chimangos living in cities learn faster than chimangos living in rural areas. So it appears that there is some selection that for smartness and boldness and exploratory behavior that cities impose on carnivores, which is not surprising because it's a very complex habitat where it's so difficult to survive. Most research on raptors living in cities has been on these two species. Eurasian goshawk, from which our own American goshawk has been split recently. It's a little bit lighter, and it has a very gorgeous white face that lives in Kamchatka and northeastern Siberia. I'm kind of waiting for it to show up in Alaska one day because of the climate change. But the behavior is quite similar, but it is more habitat flexible than our goshawk. It's not so dependent on extensive forests. And despite being prosecuted much, much more severely than American goshawks, these guys are more likely to live in cities, and particularly in city parks. And they also occur much further to the south. I think it's because they don't have to compete with Cooper's hawks, because there is no mid-size hawk in Northern Eurasia. The only other species of exhibiting hawk, which is very widespread and common, is that second species, the Eurasian sparrowhawk, which has shown up in Alaska a few times. Interestingly, in these two species, there is also very obviously some mimicry going on. They're quite similar except for size. And people usually think that it's the smaller species mimicking the bigger one to escape predation. But I think it might be the other way around. I think the bigger species might use mimicry to pretend to be the smaller species to get closer to its prey in the size range that is not threatened by the smaller bird. The general rule about mimicry is that the mimic has to be less common than the species that it mimics. So if you imagine a rabbit, for example, or a squirrel, they don't have much binocular vision. So it's much more difficult for them to tell the size than it is for us, for example. And maybe, just maybe, goshawks try to pretend to be smaller species. Cooper's hawk or sharpies in our case. Cooper's hawk in our area might be pretending to be sharpies, and Eurasian goshawks might be pretending to be Eurasian sparrowhawks just to get closer to the prey that is not threatened by smaller species. But that's just my explanation. It's something I would really like to test, and I'm trying to develop some way of doing this in the next 2 years, but it's very difficult to develop a practical approach to this. Anyway, there was a study of Eurasian goshawks in the city of Hamburg, Germany, the one in the bottom right. And it's been found that they developed some novel ways of hunting that birds living outside of cities don't usually use. For example, they can perch on high buildings and swoop down the way that peregrines usually hunt. They have learned to drive birds into big windows. They have learned to drive birds into cul-de-sacs, into dead ends between buildings. And also they learn to use street lights, and the way they do it, they find places where birds roost or feed under street lights, and they attack them coming from the dark area so that birds in the light spot cannot see them. I suspect something like that is going on here also, because if you look at birds feeding at street lights, they never sit in the light spot. They always try to hide in the shadow until they see a big insect, and then they kind of jump in and grab it and go back to the darkness. This hunting under artificial lights has been recorded in Cooper's hawks also. I don't remember in which city. And driving small birds into windows and dead ends has been observed in sharpies out in the west. Now in the top left here is the city of Kharkiv in Ukraine. That's what it looked like before the war. Unfortunately, it's just 30 kilometers from the front line. So it's under constant threat of being completely genocide, but it has a big university, so there's a lot of ornithologists there. And they've been studying urban hawks for quite some time. And for a long time, they've been recording Eurasian sparrowhawks that used streetcars and trucks to approach birds. So the raptor would find a big truck or a streetcar and hide behind it and fly at the same speed, trying to get close to a group of birds feeding on the ground. And what is interesting is that just a few years ago, there was the first observation of a goshawk in the same city using exactly the same tactic. Since this has never been observed in other cities, it's quite unlikely that hawks learned this method by observing sparrowhawks. And that's something that has been the ability to learn by example has been demonstrated in a very small number of species other than mammals. Although it's possible that it is more widespread than when we think, because, for example, it's been demonstrated in Galapagos turtles. And of course, in addition to that, there are other adaptations that other birds develop in cities. You all have probably heard about crows and seagulls dropping shells on pavement to break them. Crows also would drop small prey on pavement in front of moving cars. There are some claims that they learned to use red lights to put food item in front of the cars and then wait for them to start moving. Although this claim has been kind of disputed and we don't know if it's true. And course, small songbirds would sometimes nest on moving boats and train cars, and then just move around following their nest, which is, if you think about it, is quite strange because previous research has shown that birds kind of see the nest as the location. It's like those classical experiments with, wasps. If you make them think, if you move the nest or you make them think that the nest has been moved, they no longer recognize it as their nest. And there's been some research on birds showing that if something is outside the nest spot, it's no longer recognized. Like, in the old world, they have cuckoos that are nest parasites. And if a cuckoo chick pushes a host chick out of the nest, the host chick would be just a couple inches away and begging for food, but the birds would no longer recognize it as their own. So it is very surprising that they can nest on moving objects and follow their nest around and follow the nest and not the previous location. And of course, birds use cars in other ways, like picking food from windshield and feeding on roadkill. Here in North America and also in many parts of Eurasia, every major highway is divided into raving territories. And every day early in the morning, the resident pair would patrol its part of the freeway, looking for nighttime roadkill, trying to get it before vultures arrive and pick it up. So birds are adapting to our inventions in the ways that are very difficult to predict or expect. And I think this ability to adapt is what makes some birds more successful in colonizing cities than others. There are other mechanisms that seem to determine it. I wrote a paper many years ago showing that cultural disruption of cultural transmission between generations can make it easier for birds to colonize cities. It is known that some urban populations originate from accidental releases of pet birds or birds otherwise habituated to humans. And we now know that habituated birds make better colonizers if they are, for example, reintroduced in modified habitats, especially if they are hand-raised. When I worked on whooping crane reintroduction in Louisiana, we found that birds raised by humans are more successful than birds raised by other cranes. Why? Because they are not so much afraid of humans, and if you try to live in Louisiana, there are people everywhere. So if you are too afraid of people, you spend your entire life flying around trying to get away from them. And that makes it very difficult, for example, to raise your chicks successfully. So contrary to what was practiced by reintroduction programs before, sometimes it's better not to teach birds to be afraid of humans and be as wild as possible, but do just the opposite thing and make them familiar with people. Of course, it can go too far. They can start feeding on trash and so on. So again, it's very difficult to predict what will work and what not. Anyway, this is basically my little research on Cooper's hawks. And just to summarize things, if they are so good at adapting to cities and understanding city environment and learning to use it, one can only imagine, maybe not even imagine, how well attuned those birds would be to forest habitats. They are probably using forests in countless ways that we have no idea about. There are probably all kinds of fascinating behaviors and tricks that raptors use in the native environment. But they are very difficult to observe, and as I mentioned, predation events are very difficult to see. So it will probably take a very long time before we begin to understand and appreciate what is going on there. Any questions?
If anyone has questions, please unmute.
You were talking about the size of the birds being, I guess, an important factor. But it
Mhm.
seems that peregrines are extremely small compared to these other raptors. It is, they seem to scare the hell out of all the other birds when they come by. I mean, it's a small bird scaring them as opposed to a larger bird scaring them.
Yeah, but if you're a rabbit, you probably wouldn't be too afraid of a peregrine or a sharpie. But you have all reasons to be afraid of a Cooper's hawk. And for Cooper's hawks, mammals are an important part of their diet. Here in cities, I've seen them catch squirrels a few times. And I know from literature that they can kill small rabbits.
I wish they would start eating the squirrels.
Oh, yeah, they do. They do.
I know
And
that in Philadelphia, when we were trying to keep the birds from hitting windows, we would put carved Cooper's hawks on the buildings, and that did deter a lot of birds from coming close.
oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the most common explanation for this mimicry is that the smaller bird tries to deter predators. But there's not that many things that would feed on sharpie and not on a Cooper's hawk. It's probably like great horned owls and occasionally buried owls.
Mm.
And I am not sure at all about like long-eared owls. And all of them hunt at night anyway, so they don't see the mimicry that well. Also, I have a little thermal scope, my favorite toy. I call it my precious. And one thing I found using it is that both Coopers and Sharpies tend to roost in very dense conifers. They basically have the same roosting habits at night as saw-whet owls during the day. And that's probably their defense from all predation. So I don't think size mimicry would work under these conditions. And color mimicry. I mean, not size mimicry, but color mimicry. So I'm kind of skeptical about the more common explanation of this.
Wait, can you go back to this thermal scope? Is
Yeah.
that what you said? What is a thermal scope?
Oh, it's a little device which looks like a video camera and it shows difference between temperatures. So if you look at the forest at night, everything will be green. Different
Oh, okay.
shades
Oh,
of
so
green.
it's like basically like an infrared camera that just registers
Not
heat versus.
exactly. Infrared camera just makes infrared visible.
Mm-hmm.
Thermoscope shows difference in temperature.
Gotcha.
So you can see a mouse from like 200 yards away or an owl.
So you could like
Uh,
walk through like say Mills Reservation with one of those and just look for roosting owls?
yeah. Well, here, yeah, it does work for owls at night and in the morning. When the sun comes up, everything begins to warm up at different rates and it becomes much, much more difficult to use this thing. But at night it's wonderful, and people who do a lot of birding for night birds in the tropics and in Australia and places like that, they all try to get a thermal scope. They used to be very expensive. When I bought it with university money and it was like 2,000. But now you can get them for like 500, and there is a very small one that connects to your phone, which is like $300 or something.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It allows you to see things, to understand the environment much better as well. Like I know now that different trees keep warmth at night to different extent. I know that, for example, birds are generally better insulated than mammals of the same size. I know that water birds, ducks in particular, are amazingly well insulated. Like all you ever see is the ice. Everything else is the same temperature as the environment. Yeah, when you get this thing, the moment you get out, you start learning new things. It's like basically a new sense.
Right.
So if you hook this up to your phone, can you actually photograph the thermal images?
Yeah, well, with my scope you can't, but with all the new ones you can photograph and take videos and stuff.
That is neat.
If you're interested in buying one, there is a website called mammalwatching.com. And they have like tons of discussions of different models and which one works better for forest and which one is better for open landscapes and so on. In Australia, they're very popular and people put them on top of their cars and they transmit the image inside. So you can drive through the desert at night and you can see any small mammal or planeswalker or whatever for a mile around.
Neat.
Do they do it in Australia so they don't hit the animals, or do they do it because they want to
No,
see
when
the
they do
animals?
research, when they're looking for rare animals and birds.
Oh, gotcha. I thought it was like some sort of way to not like, hit a wildebeest or whatever those animals they have in Australia are.
Yeah.
Kangaroos.
Because it doesn't work through the glass. So if you're in the car, you have to roll down your window. And I found that doing it and driving at the same time is super difficult. But if you have more than one person in the car, you can do it while driving.
Platypus, that's what they would be looking for in Australia, right?
That would be in the water, and aquatic animals are difficult because when they surface, they're still wet, so they don't look that warm. You can still find them, but it takes some practice. I have found like water shrews and stuff. And you can also use it for whale watching at night.
Now, did you get a chance to study? I know when I lived in New York City, the big raptor that we would have was the kestrel.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had a chance to study urban kestrels?
No. No, and I think that they declined too much for it to be kind of practical. At least not in this area. In the south, they're still quite common in many places, like Florida.
But are kestrels feeding on other birds? I always see them eating insects.
Yeah, I remember a study that said 60%, 70% insects, 20% birds, and 10% rodents. But it depends on the area. It hugely changes with season and with location and everything.
Yeah, I assume they were just feeding on the cockroaches.
New York, probably, yeah. I don't think they can take a rat, and there's not that many mice.
In Texas, they do feed on the cockroaches. I've watched ducks chasing them too.
The big water cockroaches.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's Texas.
Things bigger in Texas.
So I'm curious whether you've seen any indication or any studies indicating that the birds are learning from each other. For example, behavior is seen in one city by several birds, but not in other places. Is this all them figuring out themselves because they're smart, or is there any kind of...
Oh, there's a ton of research on this. And the main body of research is on blue tits in England.
Mm-hmm.
There was one place where they learned to open milk bottles. Milkmen used to leave milk bottles at doorsteps. And in one place, blue tits learned to open them, and it spread throughout the entire population. And yeah, there's been some research on crows showing that they learn to drop things in front of cars in some cities, but not in others, and there is some spreading, but it's quite slow compared to blue tits.
Well, what about the birds that are stomping on the ground to get worms to come to the surface? Is that a learned behavior, or is that instinctive?
I have no idea. But one species that does it, of course, is the woodcock, and woodcocks lead around their chicks for a long time, and you can see females doing it when they're leading chicks. So it could quite easily be learned. But I'm not aware of anybody raising them in captivity from small chicks, and that would be the way to find out.
But don't we have a lot of research to show that crows will teach other crows, that there are generational things that happen? The
yeah,
adults see
absolutely.
something.
Yeah, like they can teach their offspring to hate certain people, and the parents would be long dead, and their grandchildren would still raise an alarm when they see the same person.
That is so cool.
Amazing. Yeah.
I think it was about jackdaws, but I'm pretty sure crows can do this.
You said that with your crane study that those that were raised by humans were more successful, but isn't there the danger of imprinting that could kind of backfire?
Oh no, they wear costumes when they raise them.
Oh, they're still wearing the crane costumes. Okay.
But there are still people walking around the cage and this kind of thing.
Well, since we have you here, I got to ask you about lanternflies. I don't know what you've studied with them, but have you are just from our experience up at the Hawk Watch, we see that they're now being, birds are starting to eat them. Have you started to see evidence of that as well?
Yeah. Mhm. That's, by the way, an example of things that you can discover when you have a thermoscope. As soon as lanternflies showed up, I discovered that they are warm-blooded.
Hmm.
And that was a big surprise for everybody because there was this theory that only very active animals can be warm-blooded. And that has big implications for like trying to reconstruct dinosaur behavior and this kind of thing. And lanternflies, they don't move that much, and they can sit in the same spot for weeks and just keep being warm. And of course, the reason they can do it is that they have unlimited energy supply in the form of sap with a lot of sugar in it.
Okay. That's interesting.
So yeah, birds are starting to eat them. Big spiders and predatory insects start eating them right away because apparently the toxin doesn't work on them. And it looks like the population is no longer growing, but slowly declining. At least that's what I see around here.
That would be good.
I have a tree of heaven in my backyard, which I use as like sacrificial crop because it kind of sucks in all the lanternflies from other trees. And in the worst year, it was completely covered with them, and now there's only like 10, 20 at the end of summer.
So do you think it's a case of the birds just not knowing what the lanternflies, it looked like such an exotic thing that, and with the coloration, it
Uh,
just seemed like
well,
it could be a dangerous thing, or do you think that there was actually toxins that could?
I think it's both. Well, they're known to be toxic, and that's why they're so brightly colored. But it looks like toxins are not contained in the entire body, and birds are learning to separate toxic parts from non-toxic parts.
Oh.
Because I don't know for sure, but I see birds kind of beating them up real hard on the pavement and doing things like that. And that's usually their way of separating. Like crows in Australia do it with cane toads. They beat them so hard that they basically shake them out of their skin and then they eat them.
I assumed it was like roadrunners that they beat up like the snake, just like you do with like a meat tenderizer, like when you go to a nice restaurant where they pound the meat, with one of those things until it's nice and tender.
Yeah, I think it's their way of making sure the prey is dead, basically.
Hmm.
But other birds don't do it all the time. They only do it with toxic stuff.
Any other questions for Vladimir?
Probably think of a dozen tomorrow, but
Have to
Or
eat.
you can just shoot me an email.
That was very interesting. Thank you.
yes.
So my email is the same as my last name at gmail.com, and my website is the same as my last name.info. And I have a bunch of books that you might find interesting. They're on the website.
Excellent.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and somebody asked about interesting sightings recently. I saw a catbird 3 weeks ago. That was surprising.
What was
It
it?
was in a great swamp on one of those wilderness trails, and there was the last spot of open water in one of the rivers, and tons of birds coming to drink. So I got a couple of very bright purple finches, and then a catbird, and then I came next day, and there were no birds, but there was a fox stalking the place, and remnants of a junco being eaten.
I'm looking at your books on your website. Did you do the photography as well?
I do some photography, but I'm not very good. Usually when I have a choice of spending $1,000 on a camera or another trip, I go for the trip. But yeah, my books are illustrated mostly with my photos. But I don't consider myself a real nature photographer.
Yeah. I was actually at the Great Swamp, was it maybe a week or two ago? I helped rescue a Cooper's hawk that had gotten injured in downtown Montclair. So I brought it to the Raptor Trust, and it's incredible with all the snow covering. Like it's basically like the roads around the by the headquarters are just filled. It's so easy to bird because all the birds are just on the side of the road. I saw catbirds on the side of the road, towhees, purple
Yeah, because
finches.
they scraped off the snow on the road shoulders, and that's the only place where birds can feed.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of raptors there right now. I missed the rough-legged hawk there, but the number of red tails is quite amazing, and there are some harriers too.
Yeah.
And I saw a merlin, something else. Yeah.
Yeah, and barred owl during the day. Oh, when we were going back to our sightings, that was my big excitement for during the snowstorm, the huge snowstorm we had. We had a barred owl on my block, which is like
Oh.
unheard of in Upper Montclair.
Oh, by the way, have you noticed that there's a lot of bald eagles around this year? Is it just my impression?
No, I think there are. There's hardly a time we go out driving in Sussex County and we don't see several.
Yeah, so it's not just me. I went to maybe they're pushed from the north by all the wonderful weather.
We were down
Yeah, I was.
today in Sayreville. We had about 8 bald eagles, 2 adult
Yeah.
and the rest youngs, various stages.
I was driving the 280 west like 3 weeks ago, and it was a very cloudy day, and the sun was just rising. And there was this beam of sunlight, and there was a pair of bald eagles in mating flight in that beam of light against the dark sky.
Nice.
And it was astonishingly beautiful, but of course it was on a freeway. I had no way of stopping to photograph it, and I didn't even have a camera.
Sometimes you just have to enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was at Oberley Road in Alpha, and there was 6 immature bald eagles all taking turns tearing apart a snow goose.
Oh.
Vladimir, when you said you were at the Wallkill the other day, did you have any short-eared owls in the evening? Did you stay that late?
No.
Okay.
I was there in like until 2 o'clock, until 1 o'clock, and I arrived late, so there was no chance. And I haven't seen any reports recently.
Yeah, Giselle was up there. Let's see, we were going to do the trip Saturday. I think she was up there Wednesday and let me know she had, I think, 2. But it's so cold and there's so much snow cover and not much else. So
yeah, the last winter was totally amazing.
we've been up there. We've had them about 3 or 4 times so far this year, anywhere from 2 to 5.
No, I was there right from time. But yeah, of course, the weather is changing and everything else is going to change now.
Well, we'll just cross our fingers for next week in Cape Ann that it'll be a little bit warmer with great Arctic species.
Yes.
Well, good luck there next weekend, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Vladimir, I'm looking on your website and your books look fascinating. So
Thank you.
definitely suggest other people go there as well and see something that might interest them.
Yeah, thanks, Vladimir.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, I'm gonna stop record.